much, Maria. We're very happy to be here. And, thank you, everyone, for making time out of your day to attend this webinar. As Dick and I go through this presentation, please let us know if you have any questions, and I will hopefully make it a little bit more of a conversation rather than a presentation. All right, so just in general, today's what we'll be focusing on primarily today is going to be understanding common types of immigration statuses and some documents that you can use to determine or help determine immigration status or identity. In U.S. immigration policy, there are many types of immigrants. Often what we hear in the news is every news story uses the term immigrants as if it were homogeneous, but in fact it's a very diverse and nuanced group of folks. So we'll go over some common types that we'll see here in central Pennsylvania, and then some of their identity, some of the common documents we see associated with those immigration statuses. So we will, it does say on the slide that we won't go over case-specific questions during the presentation, but if you'd like to shoot a question to Maria or after the presentation, Dick and I will be happy to do our best to answer case-specific questions. And then certainly we don't want to get bogged down in the merits or ethics of immigration policies or immigration policy changes. If we were to do that, we might be here all day. So going forward, Dick and I were wondering if you had any specific questions that you'd like answered today, or any particular questions that have been making you curious. So I guess we'll give you a couple minutes just to type your questions, and imagine we have a question box there.
Yes.
And perhaps what type of immigrant clients you are seeing on a day-to-day basis? Are you seeing a lot of people who are refugees? Are you seeing a lot of people who have come into the country under other kinds of immigrant statuses? Or are you more likely to be seeing non-immigrant?
Perfect. All right, so take a few moments, type in your question in the chat box and send it back to us. If you would like to just say your question or comment, please raise your hand and we will be happy to unmute you. All right, good. Thanks, Crystal. We're going to have you talk, so get ready, Crystal. Go ahead. All right. Crystal, we're not able to hear you at the moment, so if you can either speak a little bit louder or send us your question via the chat box.
Or be certain your microphone is turned on.
Right.
On your computer.
That's okay. All right. Barb, thanks for joining us, and Lori, please send us your questions. And any other folks that are all on the call with us today.
Did we introduce ourselves? I don't think we did we?
Okay. Yes, please, why don't you take a moment while folks are thinking of questions to tell us, who are you?
Who are these
Who is
people?
in this room right now? John, go ahead.
My apologies, everyone. We got off to a shotgun start, I suppose. So my name is John Ledock. I'm the Director of Immigration Legal Services at Catholic Charities of Harrisburg. I've been working in immigration law for a little over 10 years, and I've been working here in Pennsylvania for the last 4 years. And here I have with me Richard Morrison. He's a wonderful fella, and I'll let him tell you about himself.
Hi. Yes, my name is Dick Morrison. I'm an attorney, a retired attorney. I'm retired as legal counsel at Messiah College and taught there for some time. And after that, I worked half-time for a Christian ministry to Chinese graduate students and scholars on U.S. campuses. And so I had a fair amount of contact with immigration situations in that position, and now I'm volunteering with John at Catholic Charities.
Welcome. Wonderful. Great background from both of you. Experts in the field that we need.
That's right.
So at the moment, we don't have any specific things that want to be addressed, so we're just going to move on. That's okay.
Right. So everyone, don't worry if with the combined experience of both Dick and myself, if we can't answer your question, we'll make one up. So.
Absolutely. We invent something.
All right. Okay, Crystal, let's try once more. All right, Crystal, go ahead. The best laid plans. Technology is great when it works. All right. We're going to move on, Crystal. All right. Here we go. Back to John.
All right, everyone. So when we think about immigrants in the United States, you can categorize them in a few different ways, but I've always found this particular way to be a little helpful. So considering immigrants, we can think of them in four different classes. Immigrants is someone who who is moving or has moved to the United States with the intent on living or residing in the United States permanently or for 10 years or more. And most of the time you find this with folks who have been sponsored by family members or even folks who have green cards or lawful permanent resident status. The second class, non-immigrants, this is someone who has come to the United States to do something very specific. Common in this class would be foreign medical graduates or doctors who were trained abroad who have come to work or do residency or internships in the United States, international students at colleges, folks here to take vacations or holidays in the U.S. And then after they're allowed to be in the United States for a specific amount of time, depending on their program, with the expectation that they return home after that purpose is over.
And it is possible for these people people in that status rather, to change status, to adjust status, and move into a different non-immigrant status. For instance, a student who decides to stay here, wants to stay here, would have to adjust his status to become the employee of an American company, for instance, or to do religious work, or to do any of a number of specialized tasks, perform any of a number of specialized tasks.
Yeah, that's very true. And this idea of adjusting status is quite complicated and can work to our benefit often. So the third class, refugees and asylees, are unique because refugees and asylees they are unable to return home to their home country for fear of persecution or death. Now, certainly we've heard quite a bit about refugees in the news recently, but refugees are resettled by special agencies like Catholic Charities or Church World Service in central Pennsylvania. And they're rather complicated, but you can be assured when you meet a refugee, these are folks who never intended on coming to the United States, and becoming a refugee is an awfully complicated process. It's a special humanitarian class, and so they're afforded some unique benefits in that class. So, and lastly, I'm sure none of you have heard about undocumented immigrants in the news. Of course, I'm joking. So, undocumented is a rather ambiguous status. Generally, what it means is someone who has no legal status, but even someone with no legal status currently, it doesn't mean they don't have the option to get legal status, and perhaps they may have even had legal status in the past. So, undocumented folks are complicated. All right, I think we can. So some of the other types of immigrant classifications, that you might see The four basic ones we talked about are always there, of course, but these next ones are just a couple that are unique and mostly humanitarian in nature. So we heard in the news with President Trump making some changes to the DACA program, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Those are the DACA recipients are people who were brought here as children by their parents.
These are the so-called dreamers.
Exactly, dreamers. And so folks who are eligible for DACA, they do have work authorization and protection from removal, but not necessarily legal status. And it is not a permanent thing. DACA needs to be renewed every couple years, and folks can fall out of status, pretty easily. So this next program, Special Immigrant Juvenile Justice. I don't know if you guys may remember 2 years or so ago at the Mexico-Texas border, we had 60,000 or so folks coming from Honduras and Guatemala. These are all young kids under the age of 18 who were without their parents coming to the United States and basically looking for asylum because they were fleeing gang violence and just horrible situations. So this is actually this young children with this status we're seeing an increasing trend in central Pennsylvania. So we're seeing more and more of these clients coming through our offices. Next is this idea of a T visa. So you guys may have heard of human trafficking. So human trafficking, often what we see in the news is related to human sex trafficking, but there's also a very common component called labor trafficking. So folks who are brought into the United States under the auspices of some promise and then usually get used as something akin to slave labor in the United States. So it's not uncommon. We've had cases of this documented in Harrisburg and in Lancaster, so in places you really wouldn't think of it. Okay. So these next three, temporary protected status. This was also in the news lately, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Who did they? President Trump. Yep.
Haitians. These are people who came with this temporary protected status category. Included people who came from Haiti, presumably on a short-term emergency basis, and they were here because of the hurricane. Was it a hurricane? It's a hurricane in Haiti and all the catastrophic damage and so forth. And now the current administration is seeking to have all those people return to Haiti.
That's right, and yeah, we just had it's not uncommon for clients to come through the office. Well, I'll spare you that story for another time. But that TPS we have quite a few folks in central Pennsylvania with this status. So this next one, U visas. If someone's in the United States and they're a victim of a serious crime, some common forms of U visa applicants we see are those who are victims of sexual assault or attempted murder or some sort of extreme violence. The U.S. government allots 10,000 visas per year for immigrants who were victims of that kind of violence. And so U visas can allow someone to work in the United States and possibly gain lawful permanent resident status. If their case allows.
But very limited in number.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the U.S. government allots for 10,000 visas per year. What do they get, like 30,000 applications?
Yeah, a lot of applications,
yeah. So in this very last one we'll talk about is VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act. So this is in response. A few years ago, Congress expanded the VAWA program to include immigrants, and it also expanded the definitions of domestic violence. So previously, domestic violence definition was really limited to physical and emotional, but now extends to psychological abuse, financial abuse, and even withholding someone's passport or identity documents can count as a type of domestic violence. All right. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions about immigrant statuses?
All right, please send us your questions via the chat box.
I see our switchboard is lighting up.
That's right.
Keep those calls coming in.
That's right. Good Lord. I didn't realize that there were so many different classifications.
Yeah, that's what makes immigration law so complex.
Right.
And these classifications, they've been added since, there have been a couple major pieces of immigration legislation, passed in the last 30 years, but all the time there are these executive actions and, small changes in programs that make it very complicated.
Yeah, no. Oh my gosh, definitely very, very complicated. And very confusing for the folks themselves. And we want to make it for our agencies that have pantries to make it, we know that they will serve food no matter what, but we don't want for documents to be a hindrance at all.
To be a barrier.
Yeah, no, we don't want that barrier. Okay, question from Barb. Thank you. She's asking if the PowerPoint will be made available after the webinar. And yes, absolutely. We'll send up all follow-up materials to you. So the PowerPoint will be made available to you, as well as this wonderful recording will come to you as well. All right. Thank you, Barb. Any other questions? All right. Here we go. Let's continue with common identity documents.
All right. So these documents here that you see on the screen are likely the most common ones your immigrant clients will use to come into the food pantry. Now, some of these are commonplace, and you may have seen them or used them or even have them yourself, but some of these other ones, the 797 and the judge's order, are maybe a little more obscure. And so really going through these, the important thing to remember is when you see a document like this, it's not that you have to understand exactly what it is, but it's, you should know who to call and have a resource identified with someone who can help you with this kind of stuff. All right, so right there, this is a common passport. How many of you guys have passports?
Raise your hand if you have a passport. Here we go. Next to your name, you should see a little icon, little hand. So raise your hand, those that have a current passport. All right, lighting up. Not everyone, though.
That's right. It's passport's a pretty unique document. You only really need it if you go outside of the country. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have occasion to get it. Although the Real ID law that's passing in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, if you are out in Pennsylvania, and you should understand that Pennsylvania has had a little difficulty bringing its driver's license, which we all have, into compliance with what the federal government requires for a picture ID. And so, even though I think there's been a time extension on that for Pennsylvania that's been granted, it still may be necessary for us to carry our passports to get through, not only through customs and passport control and everything for traveling internationally, but to just get through security at an airport. If Pennsylvania, nationally, yes, if Pennsylvania does not come into compliance within, another year or something like that.
Right.
Anyway, it's just something to watch the news for, because it may be necessary to have a passport, or you can also get a passport card in lieu of a passport.
Interesting. I had heard that in the news. I didn't know when Pennsylvania was going to be compliant.
Yeah, it's a moving target. It keeps being extended. I think this is the second time it's been extended, but the concern is having some kind of federal registry of who's who and where we live and all that kind of thing. But of course, it's very convenient to have a passport. I happen to do some traveling, so I have had a passport for a long time, but they're not difficult to apply for. It takes a little bit of time to get them, but it's a good document to have, and they're good for 10 years.
So from our participants, it was 10% had passports.
Yeah,
So-
I'm a little surprised that not that many have passports, because you need them to go to Canada, for instance.
Right.
I was in Canada last year, and you just have to, you show them at the border.
That's right. If you want to see good hockey or get good
Exactly,
maple donuts.
exactly. If you want maple syrup, you need.
So with these passports, everyone, so passports really do they serve one function, is they show citizenship. So they give you your name and birthday and then identifying information, but they clearly show citizenship and to one particular country. So there's no way just from a passport to discern, immigration status or really anything else. It just tells you who they are. Now, it's also important to, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see an issue date and an expiration date. If you see clients coming into your office and they have an expired passport, it's very important to encourage them to go get that passport renewed.
Right.
All right. So now this is a visa. So those folks who we talked about, non-immigrants coming into the U.S., visitors and foreign doctors and all that, when you apply for those programs, you're issued a visa. And similar to the passport, it tells you where you applied for the visa. Like this person, it looks like he applied at the U.S. Embassy in Shenyang in China. We can see when it was issued and when it expires. And also in the upper, sort of the middle right-hand corner, you can see that B1, B2. And if you had inclination to research into this, you would know that's a visitor's visa. That's the category for visitors. Now, it's also important to know that this, just having a visa, also does not give you immigration, or does not give you legal status, and having an expired visa does not mean you don't have any status. It just gives you clues as to what your immigration options could be. And so lastly, this is a document issued by the Customs and Border Patrol. So the people who are at the airports, checking in foreign nationals and returning U.S. citizens, the ones who always pull Dick out of line and give them the old scrutiny.
Mm-hmm. That's
right.
right. Highly
You have that
suspicious
face.
individual. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So so this document is it's called an I-94. And basically, it tells you that you came through, you were inspected by the Customs and Border Patrol, and you entered the United States on some legal classification, and you did so through the proper channels, right? Right. So now the difference between the passport, the I-94, and the visa are a little different. But I have this analogy I've been polishing for the last couple months. So if you bear with me, I'll give it to you here. So if you can imagine going into Hershey Park, right? The visa, you can imagine, is your ticket going into Hershey Park, and the receipt is like the I-94. It tells you that you paid and what rides you can go on. And then your passport is what lets you into the beer tent.
Good, John.
That's right. So if that's helpful for you at all.
Oh, Lord.
So it's those, the passport document really tells your identity. The visa is, your classification to sort of permission to come into the United States. And your I-94 is basically a receipt saying that you did come into those classifications, or into the United States under that classification.
Would you, John, what would your response be to a client who came into one of the pantries with only the I-94, showing that they had entered the country through the appropriate means? In other words, they hadn't sneaked across the border, for instance.
So if you have someone,
that's all they had.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great question. I imagine it wouldn't be uncommon for some of you in the audience to run into that situation. So that I-94 document, we can use that to basically write a query to the Customs and Border Patrol, asking for further identification, and through that information, we can often help them get a photo ID.
Okay.
Sometimes a passport from there embassy, or possibly there's even something on file with the Customs and Border Patrol or another government agency.
I don't know, has anyone at any agency ever seen this actual form that's on the screen now? Raise your hand. I have not. Anyone ever encountered this as identification from any client?
The
I don't see any hands. So.
The individuals I worked with through this Christian organization were, as I said, graduate students and visiting scholars, postdocs, and so forth. And they were quite careful to maintain these records because, as John said, it shows that they entered legally. It shows the date they entered legally. It doesn't mean that they are in good legal status now, but it does show that they are here legally, and they would also maintain the visa and other documents to indicate that they are, a student, that their student status is good until a certain date, and so forth. And you need this if you're moving on further to try to get a green card or try to adjust status in some way.
Right, and so in this document is also it's been computerized, so it's becoming less and less common that you see an actual piece of white paper. So even if someone comes through your office and the food pantry and they said they did come into the U.S. with a visa, it's likely they have something like this on file.
Perfect. All right.
All right, so USCIS, the I-797. USCIS is an acronym that stands for the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. So you may remember, back in the day it was the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service. It was under the George W. Bush administration where all of that was dissolved and sort of pulled apart. And now it's three separate divisions under the Department of Homeland Security. So you have ICE agents, which are Immigration and Customs Enforcement, sort of like the action arm or the enforcement
police arm.
Yeah, the police arm. And then you have the Customs and Border Patrol that we talked about, CBP, and their function is to really just guard the borders and points of entry. And then you have USCIS, the Citizenship and Immigration Service, which is really the paperwork branch of the Department of Homeland Security. So in just about every application for some type of immigration benefit or change of status, sometime has to go through the Citizenship and Immigration Service. And so if a client presents a document that looks like this, the I-797 C, that form is just a general notice of action. It tells you if they've received something or are working on something or perhaps have made a decision. So this kind of information, it gives the client's name, when they filed for the benefit, and then sometimes if you see in the upper right-hand corner, the action taken, it can give you some clue as to what benefit they filed for. But really, this just gives us another set of clues we can use to get to their actual identity.
And these are often received, where I've seen them, is that they're often received when a petition for change of status has been filed. It reflects that it's been received, and what office is handling it. That's usually at the bottom someplace. And if it's been granted, if it's been approved, and the timeline on it and so forth. So it gives you a pretty good suggestion of where people are within the process, the USCIS process.
Absolutely. And so the EOIR. The EOIR is a branch of the Department of Justice that manages immigration courts. So as a part of the immigration process, there are some folks who may have been or who may be going through some type of removal proceeding, or they may have a pending asylum cases. There are many reasons you could be in immigration court. But when you get a notice from EOIR or the Department of Justice, it's very similar to the I-797. It's just usually a notice of action or gives us some clues as to the immigration case that your client might be going through. So it gives us bits of information that can help us get to the bottom of their immigration situation and maybe get them some identification. All right, so this next one, work authorization, this is an interesting document. A lot of folks, we find, get this confused with a green card. I've seen folks confuse this with a citizenship document. So it is but basically what this is, this employment authorization card is just that. It's a photo identification that allows someone to work and pay taxes in the United States. Now, there are many immigrant classifications that we talked about earlier where you can have a work authorization card. So it's a general bit of information again, but having an employment authorization card does not necessarily mean you have legal status. So it's sort of interesting in that respect. And also, when you have an employment authorization document, you are eligible to apply for a driver's license and a social security number. Now, it's also maybe helpful to note, just because you have a social security number does not make you a U.S. citizen. A social security number for a non-immigrant just gives you the privilege of paying income tax to the United States. Yeah. I was on the phone just the other day for an hour with this fellow who insisted.
That made him a citizen.
Because he's paying taxes.
Yeah,
Yep. Wow.
Yeah. It's interesting that you can have an EAD, employment authorization document like this, and be out of status.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, because you notice at the bottom here, the valid from date and an expiration date. This individual could have lost legal status in the interim, within the scope of that time, and still have the employment authorization document. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, there are certain visa statuses where one cannot get an authorization document for employment, such as being a student, or obviously a visitor of some kind, a tourist.
That's right.
They cannot work legally.
Okay.
But may I say one more thing? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, John. Something I've seen happen, though, is where an individual may be here, say as a student, not terribly uncommon, international student, and spouse wants to work and is unable to work, and yet is working somewhere and is being paid illegally. And that presents real problems for the family, as well as there's a tremendous possibility of abuse, of the person being paid less than an hourly wage, or because she or he is being paid under the table. Obviously there are no benefits involved with that. So it's very problematic.
That's right. Thank you. So some other less common document types. Folks from Latin American countries may have a country ID. It's basically something similar to the passport card Dick mentioned earlier. Foreign driver's licenses. There is some reciprocity. If you're interested, there is some reciprocity. For example, if you have a German issued driver's license, you can drive in the United States.
Doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Right. Right.
And also, speaking English is not necessarily a prerequisite to get a driver's license.
That's right.
So, full of complications. But this Social Security card we talked about, it does not. It is a form of identification, but really the legal benefits it offers really only apply to paying income taxes. The immigration court order we talked about, and this parole grant. There is occasion where someone can come to the United States, sometimes through Mexico or through Canada, or even in the airport occasionally. And when they get there, they talk to the Customs and Border Patrol officer and they say, look, I declare I want to file an asylum case. I can't go back to my home country. Or, they show up in any number of ways and just present themselves to Customs and Border Patrol. And so when that happens, the Customs and Border Patrol officer, they have this process where they can decide whether or not you should be admitted into the United States. And so when you're admitted into the United States in that situation, it's called a parole. So you become a parolee. So you're granted admission into the United States for a certain amount of time and under certain regulatory guidance.
And then you would have to apply. Mm-hmm. The individual would have to apply for asylum.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
And then lastly is this temporary protected status. So we have, like Dick mentioned, it's common with folks from Haiti. We've had folks from
natural disasters.
Yeah. Countries. And as far with Hurricane Irma and the other two hurricanes that were back to back, at the moment we haven't seen any changes or offerings of temporary protected status for those countries. However, it's interesting to note we have had a few clients from St. Martin and a few other islands they're actually territories of other countries. So we've seen flights from the United States have been offered to folks on those islands, and so they come to the United States under some status that is not permanent. So we've had a few clients come to our office and say, they were nice enough to bring us here, but now what?
No, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I know that we have had a lot of pantries see an increase in numbers, those folks from Puerto Rico. I mean, that doesn't apply, but as you said, from St. Martin's and other, I hadn't thought of those. But then they should receive temporary protected status because of that.
One would think so. Yeah.
Yeah, you
and
would
it
hope
hasn't happened?
At this time, there's no grumblings in Congress or through the White House that they're going to enact something like that.
We feed them no matter. We serve, and I know our folks will do that as well.
Excellent. All right, so now that you are experts in all types of immigration statuses and documents, this is what I suggest or recommend you do if you have a client comes to you with one of those obscure documents, or any client who has questions about their legal status. I'm sure on the ground you guys have a chance to meet these folks and have conversations and meet their families. So if you have clients with any sort of expired immigration statuses, these are resources that can help them find some resolution or some kind of relief. The first one, Immigration Advocates. This is a national organization. It's a partnership of some of the country's largest immigrant advocacy organizations. It gives a lot of resources, particularly an access a large database of service providers, which might be helpful for you. So immigration legal services offices like Catholic Charities, who specializes in working with folks who are low income, and even a listing of private immigration attorneys. Now, PA Immigrant, that's an interesting website because that's the state lobbying organization. So they're a nonprofit based in Philadelphia, and they do all of the policy lobbying and that sort of stuff for the state. Clinic Legal is the Catholic Immigration Legal Network, which is similar to Immigration Advocates. They have a directory of low-cost immigration providers, as well as some helpful education resources. And lastly is the Catholic Charities of Harrisburg. It's our website, which will give you information to our legal clinic.
Perfect. And we'll send those links in the follow-up materials to you as well.
Perfect. Right, so we get this question quite a bit. So if you have a client with some kind of immigration document and some sort of immigration questions, and at least a questionable immigration status. So the folks who you want to direct them to a very specific group of people, because immigration law is very complex and it takes a lot of time, and professional dedication to really wrap your arms around. you want to have your questions answered by two specific types of professionals. The first is a licensed immigration attorney. Immigration law is federal law, so any attorney that's licensed in at least one state can practice immigration law. And then the second option you have here is someone who's accredited by the U.S. Department of Justice. So the special accreditation it's sort of like being an attorney, but it gives you what it does is it gives you permission to practice immigration law only, right? So, and particularly you have to do it in conjunction with a nonprofit organization, and it's really designed to provide immigration legal services for low-income folks. So it's really a licensed immigration attorney or accredited representative who you'd want to go see. And so to give you an example of the difference, if you came to our office and you had questions about becoming a citizenship, either I could help you or Dick can help you. But if you came to the office and you wanted to get out of a few parking tickets, I'd have to refer you over to Dick, and he could help you with that.
No. Sorry. That goes right back to John. No, but John, you are the accredited representative, and you've done that through examination and so forth, and that's a difficult status to achieve. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep. So those are the two people we want to look at to answer immigration questions.
So send all your questions to John.
Sure, absolutely.
I'll boomerang them right back to me. Now, it's also important to know who should not be answering questions about immigration law. And we get these questions so often in our office. Even those friends or family members who might be well-intentioned, who have the best of intentions, try to help or file forms for a person that can often do more harm than good. So it's important that even though someone wants to be helpful, you do need to get that professional consultation first. So anyone who's not authorized or licensed to practice immigration law, in the United States in general, there are people who call themselves visa specialists or immigration specialists who are not licensed attorneys and they are not accredited reps, but they dole out immigration advice often for fee. And then the last one is particularly notable in central Pennsylvania. So a notario. Notario is in English it translates into notary, right? That's the English translation. Well, in Latin American countries, particularly in Mexico and Latin America, you have a notario is equivalent to an attorney. Right, so in Mexico and Latin America, they do a lot of things that an attorney would do here. So, so when folks like that, when they come to the United States, it's interesting because if you wanted to be a notary in the United States, you just have to take a course and pay a fee and get a stamp, and you can be a notary, and that has a scope of responsibility that is nothing like an attorney. Right. So, but nonetheless, you can hang the sign that says notario or notary in your window, and folks from Mexico and Latin America who don't know any better can come in and you can charge them outrageous prices for immigration advice.
One more thing I would add also, John, is the Internet. The Internet has wonderful, wonderful resources on immigration law, on practice, on procedures. As well as the USCIS website. But as John mentioned earlier, immigration law is really complex. And the deeper you get into it, the more you realize there's liable to be an exception to something, or that you haven't fully understood, one hasn't fully understood what they've read on the internet, perhaps, or it's couched in some kind of legal language that is a little obscure. So I would just caution folks who have clients who may be saying, well, I did see this on the internet and I'm taking action based on that, to be a little be a little careful. Just be mindful of the fact that there may be more happening than is obvious on the internet article that's being read.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to put it. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So, so segueing into folks who have some kind of immigration status, we'll talk for the last bit of this presentation about folks who have maybe no immigration status or those who are undocumented. So folks who are undocumented, it's important to understand that they come from so many different countries. Of course, when we see it in the news, it's Mexicans, coming into the U.S. to, work or something like that. But we have had it's pretty common in offices across central Pennsylvania to get folks from Europe, from China, South America. I've even had a few folks who are undocumented from England.
Really?
Yeah. And they didn't come here for the tea, that's for sure.
No.
But people, they come into the United States for a couple different reasons. Or the soccer, right? Sure. They don't go for the football, but they do migrate for a couple reasons, and these are the most common. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's the most common. And they're not ranked in any particular order either. But folks come because it's to find a better job and to support their families back home. With a lot of folks come in fleeing for safety. Now we have refugees and asylees coming into the U.S., but believe it or not, it's very, very difficult to be classified as a refugee, and exceptionally difficult to be classified as an asylee. So there's a lot of room in immigration law for situations where you and I on a human level would think, that's a horrible living condition, and that is not safe, these gang-infested areas. So people flee to the United States, but in immigration law, sometimes there's no exception for that. So folks escaping corrupt governments and, folks looking for freedom of religion or expression are also pretty common. So, and I'm sure, as you know, if you guys have had occasion to, get to know your undocumented folks, or even those with, questionable immigration status, there are some things that are common, regardless of their legal situations. Every day, these folks live under an exceptional degree of stress. I mean, the high stress jobs, working for sometimes less than minimum wage, little access to health care, no public benefits, or even sometimes a knowledge of support systems or public benefits. Very regularly, they're victims of violence or fraud that go unreported to the police, and they don't report to police because they're afraid of what might happen to their status. So they live in this situation of the constant fear, which you can only imagine elevates your stress levels, and the physiology that creates for you is exceptionally difficult. So it's almost like when we see folks in this undocumented status, we have to use something like not necessarily kid gloves, but they deserve a little bit of extra consideration and patience, perhaps. So when you're working with these folks, eventually you'll have that conversation, or they'll ask you, "What do I do?" And this is the point where you have some options. So depending on your the first option you have is always a private attorney. There are several good immigration attorneys in central Pennsylvania and surrounding areas. I would caution someone, if they live in central Pennsylvania, I would caution them from going to like New York or Baltimore or Philadelphia, just because of the distance. When you're working with a legal provider, the distance can be very difficult to work through. Now, private attorneys, by just nature of being having their own business, they have it's usually more expensive and often out of the price range of clients. So if that's the case, folks can come to these organizations in central Pennsylvania. So of course you have our office located in Harrisburg, International Service Center. They're located in downtown Harrisburg. the Pennsylvania Immigrant Resource Center in York, and Church World Service in Lancaster. Now, all of these offices are designed to serve folks who are low or no income folks, and they work with a variety of immigration statuses, and so we all have our specializations and our own different caveats of the offices. If you Google or contact any one of these offices, they'll help you find someone that can help if they're not able to.
And International Service Center is one of our great partners. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're fantastic. So let's say that you are working with a client and you've referred them to Catholic Charities or International Service Center, and the client comes back and there's just no legal option for them, and which is unfortunately not uncommon. Sometimes there is just no legal relief available to a person for a number of reasons. Even though that's the case, you still have some actionable options as an advocate. So the first thing is this idea of safety planning. And I can email some packets, and I'd be happy to do a sort of a train-the-trainer course on this idea of safety planning. But basically, you work with the client to think about questions they need to ask if one or more of their family members is removed or detained. So questions about who picks up the kids from school, where are the kids going to go for the next couple months, what kind of custody are we going to give, things like titles of the car, accounts, passwords to bank accounts, and those sorts of things where you can that's going to be important to know, right? So if you go through that safety planning process, that's the best way to sort of guard against or mitigate some of the bad things that come with detention. This Know Your Rights trainings, even though immigrants in general, when they go into immigration court, they're not afforded an attorney as we see in criminal courts in the United States. So, but they do have some rights in that detention and removal process. So it's important that they understand that. So we do host, I know we host them, International Service Center does, and Church World Service does in Lancaster, these Know Your Rights sessions. So it's just basically we get together with a small group and talk through various situations, like what happens if your client gets pulled over in their car while they're driving. What happens if they're a passenger in a car that gets pulled over? What happens if ICE comes to your door at your home or to your workplace? So they have some context of, and often we see that helps mitigate fear, when folks know their rights and options. And lastly, the best thing you can do for folks in this situation is, just take that holistic approach and make sure they have access to, the basic services, which you guys do such a fantastic job of.
Those on the call and those that absolutely. Mm-hmm. Our partners are fantastic. Definitely help with the food, and I know many of them refer to for other housing and clothing, whatever that they can do to help. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And there are even a few healthcare organizations, and I know of a few in Harrisburg and Gettysburg that see people once a month, regardless of their ability to pay or their health condition. Yeah. And the last thing I'd like to mention is this idea of mixed status housing. So it's interesting when you have a typical nuclear family and maybe the parents have no immigration status, but the children are U.S. citizens. Or one spouse has, some status and the other doesn't. And even more so painful when the children have no status, but the parents do. So those mixed status type of houses are becoming more and more common and have their, sort of their own unique stressors. So, the last thing if you remember anything from this presentation, and I hope it would be these 3 bullets. The first is always make sure someone has at least some form of identity. They should at least have a passport from their home country. And so they can often do that if they contact their country's consulate in the U.S. So there are quite a few in Philly and, of course, Washington, and they have websites and all that. So it's very similar to getting a passport. The process is very similar to what we would do when applying for a passport. The second thing is really encourage clients to get qualified legal assistance, at least come in for a consultation if that's the only thing they do. And even if you don't have any positive results or you can't find any relief, at least that's the case. And lastly, it's very important to encourage folks to engage in safety planning and accessing and those other basic needs that I'm sure you guys already work with. So so Dick, did I leave anything out? What do you think?
Can't think of it.
All right, and we always end with this quote from St. Francis of Assisi. I usually look at this quote every morning when I walk into the office because I see the pile of files on our desk, and I'm sure you guys have that too, and hopefully it'll give you a little bit of inspiration.
Perfect. That's wonderful.
All right. And so now we'll end the formal presentation, and please feel free to ask any questions you'd like, and we'll stay open for a couple minutes for general questions, and then if anyone has case-specific questions, we can take those afterwards, I suppose.
Excellent. Perfect. All right, so take a few moments to formulate any questions and send us through the chat box. And if you'd like to voice your question aloud, please raise your hand and we will unmute you. And as we finish up, we thank John and Richard for being part of this today, sharing your expert advice. What they see is very important in sharing that knowledge with all of you. You'll definitely receive the follow-up presentation and a recording of this session, and we can also provide that information, the follow-up, if agencies are interested for the train the trainer for safety planning, the Know Your Rights training, we can have those available as well.
Absolutely.
All right. A few more minutes with that. Send us your questions, and we will definitely need your feedback for our presenters, and that will come up as we close the session. There'll be an evaluation that will pop up, so take a few moments to complete that, and we will need your information to plan future webinars. We thank those folks that were able to join us live. We'll send our information to those that weren't able to join us live today. All right, we don't see any questions as of now. That's okay. We covered it all. You guys are too good. That's okay. That's all right. That's all right. We thank all our participants, and we hope that you all have a great day.
All right, thank you.
All right, take care. Thank you, John. Thank you, Richard.